Welcome to week 10. We have been somewhat delayed due to the ongoing issues with the COVID epidemic and whatnot, but soon we will catch up and finish off our remaining lectures. So let's begin. Today, what we are going to do is to review a bit of what we did the last time and then proceed ahead. So, last time, what we did was we had basic database table IO. So, last time, what we succeeded in doing was just use servlets to make a call to the database. And after finishing that call, take a look at what data you get from it, how the tables inside the database could be structured, and so on. So at this point, we are at a juncture where you can start coding the actual screens that we had in our application at the very beginning, if you recollect. Let's review what we did last time. And here is what we have. We have started as usual this Tomcat manager, and from that I have launched dbjsp, which is what we programmed last time. What dbjsp does is it first shows up under the URL dbjsp. This is because we have loaded it as /dbjsp in the manager. And then when we type something, all this thing does, no matter what button you press, is to simply print the user table, which is what we saw. Let's see how this much code was organized by us last time. So here is the editor and here is a description. So first what we have is we have this set of directories, which is where our code resides, and that has a particular structure. So we have the dbjsp directory here, inside which there is JSP, there is SRC, there is webinf, there is metainf, and using these we make the overall application. What do each of these contain? Well, SRC contains the servlets that we write, such as dbjsp.java, and the JSP contains the two JSPs that we care about, which includes dbjsp.jsp and usertable.jsp. What we have here is we have a servlet code which we wrote, we have the two JSPs, and we have combined these together into an application that works like this. So first of all, you have the servlet, here you have JSP, and the first visit, which is to say the visit that we make when we first just call dbjsp itself, which shows us this form, right, is going to a JSP page. How do we know that? We know that because we configure that in the web.xml file. So web.xml here, which is, look at the directory in my editor. So web.xml is kept in webinf, web.xml, and it contains how the URLs are mapped to the various implementations, right, within the system. So first what we have is this URL pattern, which is the beginning URL pattern. And so that takes us to dbjsp.jsp. How do we know that? Because this URL pattern maps to this servlet name, and this servlet name maps to this particular internal component. Now, the minute you visit a JSP, Tomcat will compile it into Java and load it and then execute it. What does that dbjsp look like? In this case, it's a simple thing. It's just a page which contains these elements, and then it says what should happen when I press the one of the buttons. So we have the post method and we have the form action. Now when we press this, we visit the URL called dbj, right? as we can see here as well, when you press it, the result is the URL that ends in dbj. How do we know what that URL does? We know that again because of web XML. So we take a look at this servlet again, and it says a URL called /dbj maps to a servlet called /dbj, which in turn maps to the class that you wrote for the JSP. So slash goes to dbjsp.jsp, the form calls dbjsp/dbj, /dbj, the URL maps to dbj, the servlet, which maps to nptel.dbjsp, the class. And in turn, it is the dbjsp class which does the actual functionality that we wanted, which is use the context to connect to the database, run this statement, get a request dispatcher, and then use this to run the JSP that we want, which we have specified in here in the request dispatcher. After all this is done, the user table JSP gets called and it gets the result of user data, which we have put here in the set attribute. And JSPs, now what they do is, so user table.jsp makes these kinds of references. And last time we saw how we fixed a bug in this and all that. So that's the reminder of what the basic structure is. Now we are going to elaborate this basic structure into something where for each button there is a different behavior, and that behavior is whatever it is that we decide to do for our overall application. So let's see what the next tasks are. We know that in our initial storyboarding, what we have is we have to have some way to register users, some way to enter expenses, and some way to get a report of what just happened. Long time ago, when we were doing the GUI, we looked at this kind of a design where we had an input field, 3 buttons, and some output field. We are going to replicate this screen design in HTML. And the new thing we are going to do is with each of these buttons, there will be a different behavior. And whenever that behavior happens, we want our app to return the appropriate results to us. So let's take a look at how you can go about designing such a screen in the world of the web. Now, as it happens, it is actually simpler to get a nice UI in the web as compared to getting a nice UI in Java, say. For whatever reason, the layout, at least nowadays, is much easier to understand in HTML than it is in the Java libraries. Although some of the newer libraries like JavaFX and all have attempted to fix that. What we do is that the browser gives us nowadays this very nice way to quickly check what the UI can be without even doing much work by using a combination of the markup language and live adjustments. The right way, so to speak, the official way to do what we are going to do next is to use CSS. But CSS is a little difficult to learn, and it has its own tricks, and it will actually take quite a bit of time to explain what CSS does. So as a beginning for the kinds of apps that we are doing, I'm going to use a technique that evolved a long time ago, which is very simple. It's still useful, but if you are doing a professional app, people for various reasons will tell you not to do this. For our purposes, though, it is fine. And if you write apps, by all means, start the way I'm doing. And then as you learn CSS, you can do better page designs. But for now, we will just do something simple that works. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to write a HTML file called register.html. And this register.html is going to basically have a table that looks like this. So this is slightly better than the ugly thing we had before. At least now we have an input field which is centered, and these three buttons are there. Now, how did we get to this? Well, the idea here is that in HTML we can do, tables, and tables have rows, and each of those have cells. So what I did is I have two rows, right, corresponding to the upper row for this one and a lower row for these three buttons. So I have my table row here and another table row here with a bunch of buttons in it. The novelty is that we are going to we are going to want the top cell to span three columns so that it looks like this. What happens if we don't have the col span here? Let's take first of all a very simplistic attitude and just put a TD here. One of the nice things about HTML is you can make these kinds of changes and quickly see the effect. So first of all, what happened was that although the entire table is still centered because of this center thing, what happened is that the first column in the first row, the first cell, got aligned with the first cell in the bottom row. And so we got something like this. The idea is that although at the top we have a single cell, conceptually it should span all the three columns. So that's what that col span thing is doing. I'll leave this here so that you can read it easily for a minute. So you have TD, col span, and align center. Now, typical HTML sites like say W3 Schools, which is reasonable for what it does, has reasonably clear explanations for what this kind of thing can do. So for example, let's take a look at one of these. So here we have, for instance, it says, I looked up, how do you do alignment within a cell, and then it has these nice examples and quickly shows you which browsers it works for, what the values are, and all that, which is good enough for most purposes once you understand what it is that is really going on. So this is what it looks like. Now what we did was we went back and put col span equals 3 and align equals center. And now that we have it, if you just reload, wait, I haven't saved it. So save it, reload it, and you have your design. Notice that I have put a thick border here around for the table. That's just to so that it is visible. To remove this, you can now do something interesting. You can get the web tools going. So we have your web developer tools. You start the inspector, and the inspector inspects all the different pieces. So here we have the table cell, here we have the input field, the buttons, and so on. And it is showing you, it is tracking what all is visible in this thing here. So let's look at this. So here we have, for example, this table row and height and cell padding and whatnot. And you can actually just directly try this out. So for example, let me remove this align thing from here. So suppose I don't specify any alignment at all. See, instantly it shifted because the normal behavior is to just left align. And now I can just go back here and change the alignment to center, and it's now center aligned. Similarly, let's say that I have this row here, the top table row, and its height is 50. So I can go in here and experiment and see what happens if I make the height 100. So as you can see, as soon as I did 100, this thing expanded in size. So you can play with these kinds of things. So for example, here I have cell padding of 5. I'm going to do a cell padding of 10. And now we have this kind of padding everywhere. which is larger than what it was before. And the next thing I'm going to do is to remove this border, because we don't actually want a border. So I'm going to put it as 0. And as you can see, the border has vanished and this starts to look much more like a normal sort of thing. So I can also experiment here. So for example, I want that field to become larger. So I can, since height worked on this, I can just experiment, see if height also works for something like this, and it looks like not. So I'm going to have to go out and figure out how it is that I can change the height of this thing to be whatever it is that I want, instead of being this small thing. So you can go and on the net figure things out and adjust things accordingly. So this is a nice little quick way of doing simple forms of design. All right. When you try to look for how to say adjust the appearance of something like a text box, sooner or later you will run into the idea of CSS styles. The good thing about styles is you don't have to know how to change the various appearance related parameters of these things in ways such that the adjustment needed is different for different types of elements. CSS provides a uniform way of adjusting the sizes of these kinds of things, and that is called a style. Now you can do this style adjustment explicitly by using CSS, but again, in our spirit of simple experimentation early on, I'm going to show you a method which has its uses. Again, as your knowledge of these kinds of things increases, you will find better ways of structuring things. But for now, let's see what we get. So I'm going to create a new edited element here called style equals, so style is the general name of the element. And what you will discover is that, let's say in here we start putting, wait a minute, something didn't quite work here. 1 second, let me try to make this edit. Edit as HTML. Okay, I don't want edit as HTML. I want attributes. I want to add an attribute. So I'm going to add an attribute, and adding attribute, I'm going to add the attribute style to this thing. So here, if you will notice that as soon as I type H, it gives me completions of what the different styles available are. And the one I want is called height. And the way this is normally adjusted is, so for example, as soon as I said height colon, it gave me a completion possibilities. And the normal answer is auto, in which case it makes the choice for you. But this time what we want is something interesting. What I want is, I want the height of the input field to be twice the size of the font. And the way to say that is to use a size measurement called EM. EM means, so 1 EM is the width of a small letter M in the font that is getting used. So I'm going to change this to 2 EM and watch what happens. So I made the change to 2 EM. And now this thing became larger as soon as I completed my edit, right? So let's fix it to auto again, just to make it clear what happened. So if I make it auto, this thing was thinner, and if I change this thing. So from time to time it's causing me trouble in editing it, but here we are. So I'm going to change this to 2em, and when I complete my edit, this became thicker. So that's the standard way of adjusting the sizes of some of these things. Now let's say that I want to change the width, and this time I'm going to say width. Again, as you can see, it gave me a completion width. So I chose width. No change has been made yet to what the width is. Again, I do colon. It says you can leave it as auto. But this time I'm going to say I want the width to be a certain percentage of the available space, say 80%. And so as you can see, the available space for this thing is the entire cell. And within it, about 80% of the space is used by the input field. And then because the alignment is center, it is perfectly centered. So once you get used to this idea of specifying the sizes using styles and so on, designing these kinds of interfaces becomes quite simple. Similarly, let's see how we can change these buttons slightly. What I want to do is that the button, which is currently completely tightly, the box of the button is adjusting itself exactly to the size of the font. Instead of that, let's say I want to create some spacing. So this time, look to the right hand side. There are standard style elements or style attributes. So the right word is attributes, as we saw when we tried to edit these things. Standard attributes are available called padding, border, and margin. So the meaning of these should be quite clear, that the padding is around the central thing, which is this content, and then as you can see under the mouse, it's showing you that this part is the padding, and it's highlighting exactly what the padding is. Now I go to the border. There isn't much of a border there, but as soon as I move a little bit away, there is margin, and there's hardly any margin around these things. Okay, so let's try and add some padding, and we'll use the same idea. So I'm going to go to attributes and add an attribute, and this time the attribute is style equals padding. So it helpfully completed things for me. I haven't specified the padding yet. So let's say I'm going to use half em, so half the size of the font, and let's see what happens. So again, as you can see, this middle button got larger. Once your experimentation is over, you can transfer some of these things to the permanent code, and in this case we won't bother with changing the button, but we will include the style changes we made in this thing. So I'm going to say edit as HTML, which gives it to me as text. Copy this guy and take it here. And paste. So there we go. So this way we have all the things available, and let me just put style at the end here. CSS, in fact, many times is like a collection of these kinds of style things, and normally, putting style directly inside the elements is not considered the right thing to do. So now that we have made the change, let's reload it. Oh, we forgot to remove the border. So I'm going to remove the border here. And then there we are. It looks like this thing is too close to the top. So I'm going to adjust that as well. And for that, what I'm going to do is the following. So what we do is, this is a very standard sort of thing. You put a div here, and look for the second occurrence of form, complete the div. This gives us a place to put our adjustments in, and just putting a div, by the way, will have no effect other than adding another div here, which you can see has appeared in the tools. Now what we can do is look at this part about this new div that we added. We added a div just inside the body, and if you look at how the structure is, when I hover over the body, I can see that the overall, so this is the overall page. The head has no display part, and this is the body. The body is covering, as it shows here, 853 times something pixels. And so what we want to do is to you have to do two things. First of all, you must make sure that this new div which we use has a structure which you can see on the right. There is always a padding. This is the content. There is some padding. There is a border, and then there is a margin. Now what we are going to do is, since we want to move this content part below, we are going to add a margin to this div. And when we do that, it will push everything within the border of the div downwards. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to put style margin top. I'm going to put it as 20%. So this is 20% of however much space is available. And as you can see, the minute you say that, it pushes the margin. So if I hover over this div, you can see that this the margin which is highlighted in the margin color is about 20% of the total available space in the page, including the bottom. So if I shut down these tools, then as you can see, this total space is about 20% of the available page. Now we can, now that we have got this form roughly looking like what we would like to see, we can do a few other things to make it look good. So first of all, let's finish off adding this style material at this point. So margin top 20%. And then what we are going to do is to add some styling to the buttons. But this time, instead of adding the style attribute everywhere, I'm going to do something different. What I'm going to do is to write the style in a separated out group like this. So look at the structure. The structure is similar to this style attribute, except that it is written in a different section called style. And then instead of having this syntax of attribute colon value semicolon, you write it like this, explicitly as attribute and then value semicolon, etc. These are the standard attributes that are available for every element in the browser. And what this style of writing, this is what is called CSS. And usually, instead of writing it as a part of the page, it is normal to get it from an external style file. But in our examples, we will stick to a simple version. What this is saying is, for every button that appears, we want the following parts. So padding is the space that is available around. Let's reload this thing and see what it looks like. So I have to save it and then reload. So as you can see, I increased some of the space, made the buttons a bit bigger, and controlled the overall size of the text field as a result of what we had already added. So one of the things I did is to put width as 70% of the total. And let's see what these tools show us. So if you look at what happens to the button here, you can get to it faster with a search over here. So if I go see button, this is my first one, and where are the rest of the buttons? So 1 of 4. Okay, we have this button and then the second one. So this is what the button shows us. Now let's see what this thing says completely. So we have the button here, and it says that these are the elements that we have added to the button, and this is what it says. It says that the padding, if I remove the padding, see, all the buttons shrink because the spacing around the content has gone to 0 as it shows over here. If I enable this, then that content comes back, as you can see. Then I added a margin top. Now what margin top shows is this highlighted area of the margin in the same color as the margin. And because the margin is at the top, the button is pushed down. Then I have said that every button should have the same width, which is 6 em, which allows all the letters to fit in nicely. And I have margin left and margin right so as to space these buttons a little bit apart. And I can do it in one place by writing it, the styles, this way, in a single place instead of writing it separately for every single button. And this kind of organization of what the appearance should be is what is called CSS. Okay, so that completes the basic layout of our form. And as you can see, this thing is self-adjusting. So if I make the overall browser window smaller or larger, it is adjusting properly. It's remaining at around 20% of the total available size that it can do. The only thing is that if it becomes too short, it remains in the middle. But if it becomes tall, then roughly it maintains the distance from the top. On the other hand, what if what we actually want is that you don't want the margin from top to be the margin of the total available screen, which is the actual machine that you are looking at, but 20% of the amount of screen that the browser actually presents. In that case, instead of saying 20%, what we can do instead is to change the measurement to be padding top so that it is within the border. So what I mean by that is, if we look at this then the difference between, if I highlight this div, the padding is this inner area, and so the margin we are getting, the distance we are getting from the top is inside the border, as opposed to this. If we had changed this to margin top, then it is outside the border. The effect may not matter, but when thinking about the layout, it is important to understand what is inside and outside the border. So for now we will stick to margin, we'll stick to padding top, and we will say that this should be 20% of the viewport. So VH here means viewport height. What we mean by the viewport is what is the available size that the browser presents. So right now what you're seeing is the height from this point that I'm highlighting now down to the input field is 20% off from the point I'm highlighting all the way to the bottom of the browser. But as I reduce the height, notice that this is now maintaining 20% of the total available height until it becomes too short and then a scroll bar appears. So this is probably what we usually mean when we want something 20% from the top. And there's one other advantage to it. Nowadays, we see sites not only on browsers with large screens, but also on mobile devices and such. And for that, these tools provide something called the responsive design mode. So here, the screen starts looking like the screen of a browser. And in that case, as long as the screen is at least this wide, the appearance of the whole system is pretty good. But if you make it shorter, then if it's a very thin tall screen, now you have problems, and you have to maybe reconsider the design, and instead of laying this out in a row like this, maybe we should lay it out in a column. So that requires better, much more detailed knowledge of CSS to be able to do responsive design. But at least as far as the height part is concerned, we seem to have got that nailed. And only because there was absolutely no space available that the center is not getting maintained correctly. Otherwise, as you can see, the system tries its best to maintain 20% from top and always in the center. Okay, so let's go back to our normal mode. And so this is how you can do screen layout design using combinations of CSS and various HTML features. Professional website designers will typically not use tables like this. Instead, they will rely on CSS. But if we are not there yet, so tables are the easiest to talk about and use in our examples. And this is the basic layout that we will use from now on to build the screens of our app. Okay,